Morgan, thank you so much for joining us here today. For everyone who's not familiar with Morgan Wright, Morgan is the Chief Security Advisor for SentinelOne, a senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government, and a former senior advisor in the U.S. State Department Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program. His testimony before the United States Congress on healthcare.gov changed the way it's changed the way governments collect personally identifiable information, and the list, I believe, goes on and on. Morgan, welcome.
You said keep it to 2 sentences, so I did.
All right. I appreciate it. I did not have to do any editing. Cool. I just want to jump right in here for everybody who's
Yeah.
watching. And just to get started, if you were to speak with someone, hypothetically in your family, who has no idea what cybersecurity really is, how do you explain what you do?
So what I do is my role is from an advisory standpoint, it's to really help look at what's coming next, help us understand the challenges, the threats that are out there, and create the awareness about these threats so that we can properly defend against them. But in simple terms, what it means is everything you have, like this, like your phone, like your laptop, like your iPad, everything that connects to the internet, that's what we're defending and protecting against hostile forces, against bad actors, and against vulnerabilities.
Again, just to clarify, Morgan, with your role, you have a lot of, I think anyone looking and seeing your background can see. So you have experience with SentinelOne, as I mentioned, which is a private organization, but also a lot of government experience and a lot
Yep,
of public experience in helping shape and influence cybersecurity policy. Can you tell us a teeny bit about that and what your
sure.
roles have been? And
I'll tell you what, I don't want to go back to when I was a young lad when swaddling clothes, but when I was in law enforcement, I actually, as a state trooper, I was lazy in the sense of I wanted to work really hard to figure out a good way so that I could spend less time doing it. When we started doing these very accident reconstruction and it involved lots of math, lots of equations, I ended up buying my first computer was the Tandy 1000 SL. And I taught myself basic programming because what I did is I wrote a few programs in BASIC so that I could do these very long calculations. So if you change a variable, when you're doing it by hand, it might take you another 10 minutes to go through that. Now I could do it with the computer and have it be done in seconds. That led into then I went to my first computer crime course in 1993, I believe it was, and started learning about the investigation of computer crime. Anytime you start thinking about the investigation of computer crime, that leads you into, as they called it in the original days, information security. Now we changed it to cybersecurity, infosec to cybersecurity. But I did that for a lot of years. I was actually instructing out at the National Security Agency, National Cryptologic School, but I was teaching on the behavioral side of it. And this actually has a tie in. I was teaching interview and interrogation and behavior analysis interviewing to damage assessment agents, people who are responsible for investigating acts of espionage against the United States or serious release of classified information. And then I had the opportunity to come out and lead an computer incident response team for SAIC, a defense contractor at the time, because they had a lot of government clients, obviously from the military and the intelligence community. But in 2000, here's the funny part. So in 2000, we're working and we're identifying these things. Nobody had ever heard of it before. It's called distributed denial of service. And we're finding it's called Trinu and Tribe Flood. And we're finding these agents, and my team is doing it's the early threat hunting and research. So we're finding these agents. And I'm working with the FBI's, what's called CTAC, Critical Infrastructure Threat Assessment Center at the time. But we said, hey, we think we could make some news about this. So we put out a press release on a Tuesday morning, I think it was, saying, hey, we have found a way to discover these agents and to prevent these kind of denial of service attacks happening. That afternoon, Mafia Boy releases the first ever denial of service attack, takes down CNN, takes down Yahoo, takes down eBay. And unbeknownst to us, that set this whole trajectory in motion. So if you think about an origin story, if you're a Wolverine fan,
so without you, there would be no
no,
DDoS. It was forgotten about. It was done once, forgotten about, and then
no,
you brought it
I
back
had
up.
nothing to do with the DDoS attack, but it got us a lot of visibility. We ended up testifying before Congress in terms of what we knew, how we knew. It went on the news right away because we're saying, what did you guys know? So that kind of started this whole thing. And that was that shift where I looked at there's actually a blend between the behavioral side of it, what people think, what people do, and cybersecurity. It's not just random ones and zeros floating around out there self organizing and deciding to attack something. There's always somebody behind the keyboard. So that's where I got into it. And that's where a lot of my work ended up taking me with the Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program. I, like I said, worked at the Department of Justice on a big information sharing program, did some pretty cool things, but it kept coming back to cyber. And I'll tell you why. Final point here. I saw a poster one time and it showed a poster of Michael Jordan. Two people on there. On the left side, it was Michael Jordan. It says Michael Jordan makes $40 million a year. So he makes X amount per X amount, whatever else. And then right next to him was Bill Gates at Microsoft in its heyday. He was CEO. Bill Gates basically makes $40 million a week and doing this and doing that. I'm just going,
Mm.
yeah, you know what? I'm never going to dunk a
And we're
basketball.
sitting here in a government building.
But hey, but looking at that, what was coming next? What's over the horizon? The implication of the network, the implication of cybersecurity was just inherent because you can't have this capability without an underlying way to protect it because bad actors, just even if it's like a natural disaster, so to speak, hurricanes, we've seen the floods here in the United States in Western North
Sure.
Carolina. Some bad things happen, but when you look at those things that are done by transnational criminal actors, state actors, that's now that all of our critical infrastructure is mapped to it, now that we've got so many things dependent upon this network, this internet. The cyber has to be the underpinning of all of that for us to have confidence that this is going to work each and every time we depend on it.
And so, first of all, thank you for all that background. That was quite interesting. I definitely will have follow up questions after. If we're thinking about infrastructure, we're thinking about large scale infrastructure, public infrastructure. It's interesting because in the last couple of years, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're seeing the federal government, and I didn't plan on discussing this. I'm just thinking of it, but we're seeing the federal government come out with more cybersecurity restrictions, either recommendations or guidelines from the White House, or through different federal agencies that they're being pushed, such as the FDA and CISA and more. Why is it that if we so obviously rely on all of these, just traffic lights alone, right? We so obviously rely on this that the standards of cybersecurity standards of developers and even the people in government who are procuring them um, don't necessarily meet the absolute urgency.
That's a great question. And I was taking just a pause because it really has a lot of implications. One of the reasons I believe it goes back to the testimony gave before Congress because we were discussing the safety and security of healthcare.gov, everything from how it was built, how it was designed, how it was administered, the security of it. And I found it interesting that the people in the positions of power, the policymakers, there were a lot of people that did not understand the basic tenets of cybersecurity, even explaining to them why you needed to have HTTPS as opposed to HTTP,
Hmm.
why that was important. We have just launched a $500 million government website. It was HTTP, and we're asking for personally identifiable information like how old are you? What's your gender? Do you smoke? Are you pregnant? And all of this is going over unsecure. So what hit me was that a lot of the times we have this misplaced belief that the people who are legislating, the people in positions of power, actually understand the issues they're legislating on. And I found that not to be the case. We're getting better with cyber. If you get a collection of CEOs in a room and you ask about profit and loss and you talk about EBITDA and all those fancy accounting terms, they know these things left and right. It was a
Hmm.
challenge even in the private sector talking to CEOs about cyber. What does it mean? What's your patching routine? How do you look at vulnerabilities? How do you do X, Y, and Z? It's always been that sometimes at that level of where the policy is made is not always it's not synchronized with the people who really understand the issue but are not policy makers. So I think in government a lot of times it's a lagging type of thing to where they're just fighting yesterday's war. They're trying to catch
Hmm.
up, but we were talking earlier before we started recording, but we're talking about things like 9/11. On 9/10, nobody thought about reinforcing the cockpit doors, right? But on
Sure.
9/12, they did. But the problem was it was too late by then. That was fighting yesterday's war. So the reason that we have all these things come out is they're trying and they're struggling, I think, really hard to catch up to the way the world is, but they're still a step behind, right? So it's AI and machine learning and all of these other things have just thrown a big monkey wrench into how they think about things because it is light years ahead of the way legislation normally moves along.
Hmm.
Last anecdote here to bring it into point. So, coming out of a law enforcement background and working with some federal agencies, they used to do these things called Title III, which are, you might call them wiretaps, electronic and oral intercept of written spoken communication. The original wiretap statute was written in 1928. And it took years before that could actually, and even then, it wasn't as current as it needed to be to understand encrypted voice over IP and the types of communications. So government is never a good indicator of where things are leading. It's usually an indicator of where things have been.
I just have I had one thought as you were speaking. I had many thoughts as you were speaking, but one that stands out that I wanted to bring up when it comes to, you're right. We do assume that legislators have knowledge about pretty much everything that they legislate on when it's perhaps unreasonable to expect that. And when it comes specifically to cybersecurity in something like healthcare.gov, where it's just really obvious that you need to have some kind of protection layer on this data, do you think it could be just the idea of attacking a healthcare website is so inhumane that it just doesn't, it's hard for them to get their heads around? Or do you think it has more to do with it's just too much of a headache, and by the time they perhaps address this problem, there'll just be five new ones because technology has already advanced?
Yeah, that's if you go back and think about some of the terrorist acts, the reason that they've worked is because we weren't thinking that way. And I actually helped provide input on the 9/11 report when the 9/11 commission was working. I was briefing the attorney general and the deputy attorney general, what they call the DAG, about what we were doing at the Department of Justice on building this information sharing. But the one big conclusion that came out of it, the one big finding was 9/11 was caused by a failure of imagination. So, and I think that's what you're getting into is that a lot of times
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. Look, I just got through doing a briefing and I did a keynote, but basically it's on the coming Cold War in cyberspace with Russia. And I tell people there's three things. The problem isn't the problem. The problem isn't the way you think about the problem. There's only one problem that matters. How does your adversary think about the problem? And I think that's the trap we've fallen into. We don't think like our adversaries think. We think, like to your point, why would somebody attack a healthcare website? Because it's mission critical, or any of functions of healthcare, right? Because it's mission critical, people's lives could potentially be on the line. There's a sense of urgency to get it fixed. So if I'm a ransomware gang and I decide to attack it, guess what? A pretty high probability you're going to pay the ransom because you need to be back up and running. So it doesn't matter what you think. Oh, I would never do that. That's the whole point. That's why they were attacking it, because you wouldn't do it. They do. So whether it's state actors, whether it's government actor or transnational criminal actors, I think you're right to bring it back full circle. A lot of these policy people, they can't they can't see what's coming next. They can't see over the horizon, right? We know what we know, what we don't know. Our real challenges are what we don't know, we don't know. So that's the over the horizon thinking, something we can't see, but I know it's out there. So what's coming next? And that's where I think we fail a lot, is to address what's coming next as opposed to what just happened. Hey, what just happened? You can put laws in place after the fact, but it doesn't really help you, and policies. You got to think about what's coming next. What do we need to be looking at that AI might do? And they're trying to get ahead on AI because they're promulgating a lot of
Hmm.
regulations around that. But I
Both
think
sides. When you say they, you mean both sides. I'm
on
trying to
both
get
sides.
ahead on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
let
a
me tell
race.
you, interesting enough, as I was having this discussion with one of the people at SentinelOne yesterday, and it's like when you think about AI, I look at it the same way we used to look at ransomware. You have gangs now that have the expertise, that have the knowledge, and what they do is they're building these platforms, these frameworks, and then they're creating affiliates. Hey, you can now rent my platform to do these attacks. Well,
Hmm.
guess what? They're going to
Hmm.
do the same thing with AI platforms. So while we're using AI to defend, they're now going to be consolidating and saying, hey, we're going to put all our money, all our effort, all our brain power into creating a platform, and then we'll lease that platform out in the way of affiliates.
Yeah, this whole thing's gonna sound like an ad. I'm not being compensated for this, but from Sentinel Labs, I've been doing some research that I've been reading some of the research they've been putting out. And the idea that it's like a pain for me to rent a car, but I think if I wanted to rent a ransomware attack, I think it would be really easy, which
Their
is a
customer service
terrifying
is
thought. Yeah,
their customer service, they make it so easy to pay the ransomware. Why? Because they want the money.
sure.
I was sitting there, I went through the same challenge trying to I can't remember what it was here just a couple weeks ago, but but the thought went through my head. Man, if you were a criminal, you would want my money more than you want it being a good person that's not violating the law. Criminals, these gangs, they make it so easy to pay up. Why? Because that's their incentive, right? They're doing it for the money. They're not doing it for the public good.
Sure.
It reminds me of that Seinfeld episode. If you remember when he rented the car and he gets there and it's not there and he's got the confirmation number, and it was so painful with Jerry trying to, I have a confirmation number. I know what a confirmation number is. No, I don't think you do. Because if you did, I would have a car here.
Yeah, it's just when that's another problem is when the data doesn't match reality, which I would
Right.
think is probably where a lot of was reading, and then I actually have another question for you. But I was just reading something today about how the biggest threat in cybersecurity now might be the forced return to office for a lot of companies because there's, and I don't want to get into an RTO conversation, but the idea that you now have, instead of forcing people to log in securely remotely, now everyone's in person. And it's easier to just write your password on a notepad or say something. And so that whole idea as well. But so getting to know you a bit, a little more on a personal level, if you weren't in cybersecurity, what would you be doing?
I'd be in a rock band. So I was a musician in college. That's how I went to school, was on a music scholarship. I would played a variety of instruments, but I actually auditioned for the Johnny Carson Tonight Show back when he was on the air. I'm dating
Cool.
myself, but because the little town I grew up in, our league, it was called the North Central Kansas League, the NCKL. One of the towns I grew up in, a little town called Chapman. One of the towns there called Clay Center. The music directors was personal friends with Doc Severinsen, so I got to go to a jazz festival one time of the schools that Doc Severinsen was at. And hey, one thing led to another. Heard me playing and stuff. Said, "Hey, if you ever want to come out and try out, can't promise you anything, but no, I think I'd be doing a musician." One of my good friends is actually one of the guitarists for Carrie Underwood, and he goes all over the place from Las Vegas and stuff. So I might be that. Or actually, one other thing, I'm actually working on another project. I've got my second round of grant funding from the Department of Justice. I'm working with the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police, the state police, and the Chesterfield County Police. Got to make sure I got to give everybody credit, but it's
Of
basically a new
course.
way. It's a new way to fight crime. So think of America's Most Wanted, but in an app form, a way that connects everybody the way Facebook connects us based on connections in common. So we're going to be connecting you to criminal cases based on things you have in common with the case: state, location, time, demographics, relation. So I think between being in a rock band and doing that, those are the two things I'd be doing.
Or maybe the rock band will be called America's Most Wanted.
I
And
played harp band. We played in a band. I played in a band up
that
until
was a great
5 or
show,
6
by the
years
way.
ago. Yeah. It was called the Rolling Justice Review. I was actually a technical advisor for John Walsh and America's Most Wanted for a year and a half. One of the solutions I built, called Digital
Cool.
Signage for Public Safety, was featured on their 1000th episode. So, yeah, I definitely would be doing. I like doing media stuff like this. So definitely with that, there'd be a podcast involved. There'd be storytelling involved because but I enjoy that. But in the other end, then
I think your
I'd be
next
getting out
career
the
is
guitar.
calling.
Yeah, but then I'd be getting out the guitar and we'd be riffing on some cover band stuff, but I'm still a fan of the '70s, '80s, and just into the early '90s with some of the rock.
All right. So let me know what next time I'll put some extra I'll put some extra honey in the tea and we'll get started.
Okay.
I'll do vocals. Awesome. Awesome. Another question I have is surrounding AI. Now, I'm going to preface the question by saying, um, you don't have to sing the endless praises of AI. So in your I just want an honest answer. In your opinion, for the work that you do and let's say the work you do with the teams you work with, how do you see AI having an impact in the near future? Not necessarily immediate future and not really 10 years into the future, but in the next 1 to 3 years, what kind of influence are you seeing or impact are you seeing AI have within the world of cybersecurity?
I think one of the things AI is gonna have an immediate impact on, it's gonna start helping us address the talent gap and the skills shortage and the lack of people involved in cybersecurity. It used to be, especially when a lot of processes were manual, if you wanted even a person working hard, it was tough in an 8-hour day to actually do 8 hours of work because you had interruptions, you had other things, right? I think AI is gonna enable us to do far more relevant work in a shorter amount of time. And the biggest thing I see AI doing is helping us expose knowledge that we hadn't thought about before, generating additional insights, but getting us quicker, faster, better to a decision, the ability to make a decision. So there's this thing called the OODA loop. It has a history out of the Vietnam War, but it's basically how it's what Top Gun was created for: observation, orientation, decision, action. How fast can I collect all this information, culture, observe where I'm at, orient, decide, and then take action, right? But then there's another loop called collect, fuse, analyze, produce, disseminate. And that's the collection, fusion, analysis part of whether it's intelligence, whether it's cyber threat hunting. That was always the big manually labor intensive part, right? So now we're being able to automate these things to where we're getting quicker, faster, better, to where now as a human, I can use my cognitive abilities much better rather than killing me with a ton of spreadsheets and looking through over here. Now everything's distilled down and I'm giving those kernels of things that I can now use my cognitive ability to make subjective assessments on and do a better job of taking the right action. I would rather have 5 questions in front of me that I had to answer as opposed to diving through gigabytes of information to find those 5 questions. Because if you give it to me then my cognitive abilities are all focused on solving those problems ahead of me. So I see in the 1 to 3 years impacts we're going to be able to make in everything from a cyber standpoint in terms of not only from a tool set, the ability to automate and look at, even again, no, I don't do commercials, so don't take this as a commercial, but it was a concept that came out 5 months ago. They announced it, SentinelOne did, but it's the concept of the autonomous SOC, Security Operations Center. So now we're talking
Hmm.
about something that used to take a lot of people. And people say, well, you're taking away jobs. No, you don't understand. We can't fill the jobs. That's the whole point. What we're trying to say is, how can we automate a lot of the lower level activity and take people, upskill them, reskill them, and put them in higher value, higher level positions to where their thinking, their brain power is put to better use as opposed to being manual labor to where, hey, you're just digging through spreadsheets and scanning stuff. So I think AI, to me, that's the 1 to 3 year impact it's going to have is automating security operations and response. But at the same time, from a human standpoint, helping close those skill gaps. I could teach you in 10 minutes, Rafi, teach you in 10 minutes how to actually do threat
Me,
hunting.
I'm
Yeah.
not, I don't learn easy.
Yeah, you do. We did this with a reporter. We actually set a reporter down man against machine. 10 minutes, they were able to actually do effective threat hunting because guess what? You can do. It's what you're doing right now. You have the ability to critically think and ask questions. That's what AI is going to allow us to do is ask questions of the data in a way we could never do before. If I said, Rafi, you have no training at all. Here's 20 gigabytes of spreadsheets. Now go find me the 5 machines that are exposed and connecting to China. You'd go, time for tea, you'd leave. But if
Yeah,
I simply
yeah.
said, here's how you ask the question, you could say, show me the 5 machines that are connecting to China using this vulnerability. If I could teach you just to ask that one question, guess what? You've done, I've taught you how to ask the right question. The technology, the AI does all the hard work. You don't have to do the hard work anymore, but what you have to be good at is asking the right question. That's where I think AI is going to have a big impact in the next 1 to 3 years is our ability to take those questions and turn those into results faster than we could if it was just intensive manual process.
And when you're speaking of especially a SOC, and I know people who work in a SOC and or more than one, it's an exhausting job. It's an exhausting process. And it takes dedication, determination, and it's really hard, tedious work. And so the idea of of taking these people who originally I would hope entered cybersecurity for the good that it does and the interest that it sparks and all the excitement that they originally had and allows them to continue that, to take the imagination, as you mentioned, and just keep it rolling forward. So exactly, answer a few questions. You need more information on it, just ask again. But the creative process is allowed
Yep.
to remain free instead of being bogged down in these details all the time. And so I wonder with that, what kind, if we remove the a large level of frustration from the job, I don't think any job is ever frustration free. But if you could remove that level, it just frees up the human factor as well, which is just so it remains to be seen how things develop. But I agree. That was a great the idea of having an entire SOC automated. I'd love to
Yeah.
see it. It would be really
Well,
cool.
but you hit upon the point though for a key person last point here for the people. There is a danger of cognitive load, right? You can only hold the mind is for having ideas, not holding ideas. So trying to put everything in somebody's head is not going to work. But if I could free up your time, you know what? Name the last time you got a great idea when you're going through 8 hours of meetings. Nobody gets great. Where you get a great idea,
Hmm.
that's where they always say, where do you get a great idea? You're in the shower, right? Because you're unburdened cognitively by all this other stuff. And your mind's allowed to associate, or you wake up in the morning and you go, oh, that's the answer. That's what we got to get back to is that when that problem surfaces, you've got the capacity to take your cognitive abilities and focus those as opposed to those being exhausted by doing all this manual work. So I think it will make a difference. And I think we will see different types of skills and different types of
Hmm.
people being recruited in to cybersecurity because last point here, the National Security Agency, which does a lot of secret stuff and they do a lot of cryptanalysis. One of the people they used to like to hire were musicians. And you know why they like to hire musicians? Because musicians, I learned this from somebody later on, but when I was in college, I was a music major, like I said, but we would have these sight reading competitions. I'd give you a piece of sheet music. You had 1 minute to look at it, then you had to play it. We were good at recognizing patterns. And from a cryptography standpoint, it's the ability to look and recognize patterns. So musicians had that built in skill. I just had to teach you a little bit of math. It's very hard to teach creativity. You can't tell, hey, I want you to be creative. But it's easier to teach you with that creative capability a different way to apply it. And that's what I think AI is going to do is take the inherent capabilities and creativity many people have and show them a different way to apply it to get a different outcome.
Absolutely. And again, it's exciting. I think the more I understand about AI's limitations, which are always changing, but the more I understand about AI's limitations, the more excited I am about what it can do and then what we're going to see hopefully very soon. We only have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to get your insight. If you could change one thing about the way people view cybersecurity. Now, this is for people who are not very familiar with cybersecurity, for perhaps the average person who wants to be conscious of whatever it is, and also for people in the industry. They may not have considered what's one thing you would change about how people view or think about cybersecurity.
Funny you mentioned that because I actually started putting this together. So if I showed this to you, you see a series of nine dots that look like a box, right?
Sure.
Yeah. See, that's where you've
Oh,
already failed because
rectangle.
what I've already done, because we've heard this phrase, think outside the box, but I asked people, where did it come from? I've had only one person that kind of got part of it. The answer, it actually came from a 1930 study by a researcher called Meyer, University of Michigan, and it was published in the Journal of Comparative Psychology, but it's how people think about solving problems. So if I said, Rafi, what I want you to do is connect all nine dots with four straight lines. What I've already seeded into your mind is that this is in the shape of a box. So the chances are you're going to be just looking at the box. How do I connect all nine dots? But the only way to solve the problem, and I tell people this, I said, remember, think outside the box. The only way to solve the problem is to go up and out of the box. So there are two places where you go up and outside the box. You go out of it
Mm,
here, and you go out of it here. So guess where our adversaries operate and think? They think in these areas here. I'm doing this reverse, right? So they're thinking in these areas here. If I were going to change one thing, it would be how people think about the problem. We are too constrained, we're too limited because we allow what we've thought we've known before to influence how we think. And all it took, and I do this all the time. I used to teach this, do an interview and interrogation, damage assessment, counterintelligence stuff. But it's like, how many of you guys see a box here? The minute you nod your head and you say you see a box, you've now limited all your options, because when I say now connect all nine dots with four straight lines, don't take your pen off the paper. What do you spend all your time doing? Staying inside the box, even though the answer is on the front wall. It says think outside the box. So I think that's one of the biggest problems we had, is the reason we have these exploits, the reason we have these 0 days is because we've got bad people, got nation state actors, criminals. They're thinking outside the box. Now, people say that's illegal. No, it's not illegal to think outside the box. It's illegal to act outside the box. So what you do is you think here so that you can defend here. Think here, defend here, change the way you think. I think if that's one thing I could change about cybersecurity, it's not about got to be more technical, got to be this. I could solve more problems with people with fewer skills if I could teach you to think differently about the problem. That goes back into the imagination and thinking critically. I tell you, it's the thinking issue. It's not a technology issue. It's not a keyboard issue. It starts here, as Hercule Poirot, the great Belgian detective, said, it's the little gray cells, right? We got to change how we use our little gray cells to think about the problem. If I could change one thing, that would be it.
awesome. Awesome. How can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach out?
If you can't find me on the internet, you're not trying. So,
All right.
no, look,
And you're
just Morgan Wright. You'll find me there. I'm actually on LinkedIn, so reached out on LinkedIn. Twitter, it's at Morgan Wright _US. Email, you can get me at morganw@sentinelone.com. And I don't post a lot. I do stuff, but I learn a lot from watching that stuff. But if you want to reach out and connect with me, especially LinkedIn, that's a good place to go. And look, again, not to do a commercial, but just finish up. A lot of great information. Go to sentinelone.com. Just tons of great information there. And people far smarter than me have written about this stuff. So if you're interested in a particular topic, like Rafi, you and I have collaborated on many things.
sure,
So
sure. We have.
yeah. And
Thank
but
you. I
yeah, a lot of
appreciate that shout out.
yeah. Hey, no, look, you guys, I'm telling you what, man, it's hard to find people like you who get it, who can understand it and write about it. A lot of times you get people that say, tell me, and you give them stuff. And then when they write it up, you spend a lot of your time and you go, it would have been easier if I just wrote the piece myself.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Never
Well,
with
thank
you,
you.
though. With you, it's a very minor edits, if anything, with you at all. It's usually correcting my name because you always want to spell it Benjamin Netanyahu. No, my name's not Benjamin Netanyahu. It's just, by the way, that was my joke from a long time ago. I don't know, back in the day when Netscape used to be around, Netscape
Yeah,
and
sure.
Yahoo were going to merge.
Uh,
It was going to be called Netanyahu.
Netanyahu. Like when FedEx and UPS fed up, my dad would tell that joke.
That
Like
joke,
every
yeah.
waiter in the Northeast has heard that joke during the mid 90s. All right, Morgan, thank you so much. It's been great
Yeah.
having you. We'll speak soon.
All right, guys, be careful.